On this episode of Opposing Roles, we go over what is a role-playing game and get things kind of queued up, ready for our very first almost actual play episode.
Everyone have dice, extra paper, pencils, their character sheets? All right, let's begin.
Here's your story, let's begin. The world is fine, come on, dive in. The future's here, it's right before your eyes.
Let's roll for initiative.
Could be life, bigger than the world. Living out the hopes and dreams of every boy and every girl. You could fly higher than the sky, shine brighter than the stars. You could have all you ever wanted. Shoot the moon and reach for Mars, you know you could.
This season, we're playing Star Wars, the role-playing game by West End Games. Our players this season are...
This is Steve Woosley, or Woos.
This is Samantha Stark, also known as Sam.
This is Eric Sternberger, known as Eric Sternberger.
And I am your game master, Nick Arganbright, and this is Opposing Roles.
You could be larger than life, bigger than the world.
Hi, I'm Nick Arganbright, and this is Opposing Roles, Season 1, Episode 0. This is almost an actual play podcast with every season featuring a different RPG game system. Sometimes it may end up being a reoccurring game system. Other times it could be brand new. So, Opposing Roles is meant to be for new and seasoned RPG fans alike, albeit with a slant towards those a bit green, like myself and some of my players. Now, I'm not entirely green, but only lately have been correctly game mastering in any sense of the word. And some of the systems I'm not 100% versed in and learning, just as the players are. And even then, perhaps we can hope to have more seasoned players on the show in the future, though we'll get to that a bit later on in this episode. Now, before I go further, if at any point you feel a section of this episode is not necessarily for you, we please suggest you check out our show notes, where you can check out the timestamps and skip ahead to a section that may be more up to your speed. Okay. So for a lot of people not familiar with all this, what does almost actual play RPG mean? Well, first, let's get into some basics and look into the definition of RPG. RPG stands for role-playing game. In particular, at least as of right now, we are playing tabletop role-playing games, or as they're known, pen and paper RPGs. In role-playing games, or RPGs, the players play as characters. Sometimes they use templated characters pre-created before the game. Other times, and most of the time, they are created by the players. The players determine their actions of their characters based upon their characterization, utilizing a set system of rules and guidelines. Within the rules, the players have the freedom to improvise, with their choices shaping the direction and the outcome of the game. The Game Master is another component. The GM or Game Master tries to assist players in telling the story and acts as all non-player characters. They are also aware of all the obstacles that the players will encounter during the game. Some of them are planned, and, well, others are not planned. All of these obstacles, though, planned or not planned, are things that will be done via encounters with the players. Some can be handled with role-playing or acting out or improvising. The rest, though, is done by a series of checks and balances. Most RPGs, or at least the ones we'll try to play here on Opposing Roles, will feature a wide array of dice to help perform those checks and balances. For example, if your character has a skill called Sneak, consisting of a stat of 4D, meaning 4 six-sided dice, or 4d6 actually, that means you would roll that many six-sided dice and then add that total up. If the total beats the difficulty number set by the Game Master, your character succeeds at sneaking around. And if they don't, well, it means your character is seen, or maybe they get right to the end of where they're trying to sneak through, and then all of a sudden their foot is leaving the wooden plank, and all of a sudden you hear a... And everyone that you're trying to sneak by is alerted to your presence. Now, what overall that means for the player is, the player is integral to the game, meaning that the game can change at any time depending on how the player plays. Now, take away that one player and make it 3 players. Each player bouncing ideas and thoughts off of each other. As a game master, is he or she's job to act as referee, host, lead storyteller, helping the players along. So, a scenario or adventure could be played multiple times, multiple ways, because how each player approaches the adventure could modify and reshape the game and how it plays out. Pretty cool, huh? So, an almost actual play RPG podcast means that we'll be recording a game session, and we'll provide some slight edits here and there, mostly filling in goofs that I, as game master, has made and would like to redo, or perhaps in some cases cut out to better illustrate what was going on and move it forward, keep the pacing going. And heck, who knows, maybe some sound effects, though, let's be honest, probably not. You're probably just going to hear me go pew 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 pew. Each RPG game runs on a system of rules. The biggest ones out there, as example, are D20 systems. That stands, by the way, for 20-sided dice. Dungeons & Dragons utilizes this as a primary dice roll, using other dice as well, though. Other systems like Palladium use this as well. Again, they are a D20 system. Then there are some systems, like the one we will be utilizing for our first season, which only uses different types of dice. In our case, 6-sided dice. So each system has their own rules utilizing dice and more for how characters are created and to battles and how they're performed. It's also important to throw out there something that you may hear come up in the podcast occasionally, and that is terms like adventures, scenarios, or campaign. In role-playing games, campaigns are long-running, where player characters play continuously and have long, overarching roles. Adventures or scenarios are also called one-offs or one-shots occasionally as well. Other times, they're just a section of a campaign as well, which leads to the format of this podcast in a way. And I want to be straightforward. Opposing Roles format will be perhaps strange to some. It's important to note that as a podcast, we're audio-based, but we're going to follow a similar release schedule, similar to that of a television show. Now, we're not doing the Netflix model. Netflix model, to me at least, means that we release the whole show at once and you can binge it right away. We're not doing that. Instead, we're doing something more akin to, I believe, what Hulu is doing or has done here and there, where they release an episode a week like a normal TV show, one episode at a time. Now, what's also unique about our format is that each season could be completely different from before. The RPG games themselves that we will play may vary from season to season and could be a different experience, not just for those in the show, but for those listening. The plan is to have each season be a new game system with a new set of players, some old, some new, including on the Game Master side, because, well, heck, I'd like to play a game or two, at least as a player character, and not as a Game Master. So, depending on how the players play the game, if they survive and enjoy the experience, they may come back for another season, or it just may be a one-off for them. It's really dependent on the players themselves. For example, Season 1 will be featuring the West End Games created Star Wars the Role-Playing Game, with myself, Nick Arganbright, as Game Master, and the player characters, Eric Sternberger, Stephen Woosley, aka Woos, and Samantha Stark. Once released, Season 2 might not be out for a little bit after that, but it could be a completely different game system, like 13th Age, or I think the Worlds of Darkness, Palladium Megaverse system, Dungeons & Dragons, and could feature a different Game Master with a different set of players altogether. Season 3 would then jump back into the Star Wars, either with different players or the same players and their same characters, or could be another game system we haven't played yet, and so on and so forth. Being that there would be a lapse of time between seasons, it's so very important for me to stress that if you enjoy what we're doing here on Opposing Roles, please subscribe to our show in whatever podcatching app you use, whether it be the podcast app on iOS, aka the Apple operating system, or whatever app you use on your Android. Okay, so now that we've covered the ins and outs of what an RPG is, what's an actual play podcast, or in our case, an almost actual play podcast? All right, so now to tell you a little bit more about our first inaugural season in a bit more detail. As you heard me say a moment ago, Season 1 of Opposing Roles will feature Star Wars, the role-playing game, as created by West End Games and recently re-released and published by Fantasy Flight Games. Or at least that was the plan. We also borrowed stuff from later editions, and also fans of the game using other PDFs and fan homebrewed content. We've used that as well. Now, you heard me say earlier that Dungeons & Dragons is a D20 system and it heavily relies on the 20-sided dice. Star Wars, the role-playing game by Weston Games, is a bit different and uses the D6 system, meaning that all stat checks, successes, and failures all utilize the 6-sided dice. The game also tends to be, or it can be, a bit more brutal than other game systems as it does not utilize normal hit/life points for each character. So while as a game master, I have it open-ended to continue into another scenario, or it just could be another one-shot where all the characters die or they get their ending, which in RPG terms is one adventure that is meant to have a full tale told here. If you'd like more information, though, on the Weston Games version of Star Wars, there's plenty of info out there. Please Google Star Wars RPG Weston Games, and you will find plenty of information that will assist you. Other things to keep in mind. The first season, at least for me as Game Master, has been a real learning experience. While 2 of my 3 players have never done an RPG before, some of them may be, despite wanting this to be for everyone, right out of the game hard for some of the seasoned pros to listen to, especially if you're a rule lawyer. You may tend to have some disagreements with how I allow things to play out. I tend to, in general, as a GM, tend to play a little hard, fast, and loose with the rules, within reason, and Star Wars, the RPG game by Weston Games, especially for this first season, makes no exception of this. It's also important to know that outside Palladium, I've never game mastered a different game system before, and, well, in over 20 years at least, especially game mastering. So if I come off a bit new and a bit excitable, I apologize. Also, you can probably tell this has all been pre-written out, so I'm a lot more calm and more soft-spoken. The second half of the first season hopefully will be a little bit more calm and cool and collected. The first season, though, I'm like a little chihuahua dog, so I apologize for that. So, to pull back the curtain, though, further on the show and go over what our plan is, we record 3 or 4 multi-hour game sessions, and we then edit them down to nice, digestible chunks, hence an almost actual play podcast. Sadly, our first session, and it's the first time I was so excited I had miniatures that I could use, I had to take it to the farm and, like old Yeller. Meaning that, and this is surprising to no one who's produced an audio podcast, it's not cool if you sit there and go, I'm going to move the ship over this way, and you're going to move this ship over that way. Yeah, okay. And then you're going to do this? All right, fantastic. All right, and that's what you do. You rolled successfully. That doesn't really sound great on an audio podcast. So, after talking with my editor, the amazing Will Dell, we've come to the realization that it's probably good to just skip that whole first session. I will add, though, some very interesting things and fun things came out of it that I need to tell you about right now. First off, if you're from the Columbus, Ohio area, 2 of my players, Eric and Woos, may seem familiar to you as they are part of the improv group, or troupe, depending on your choice of the word, FFN, standing for Full Frontal Nudity. They've been around for years. They are seasoned improvisers, and as such, really know when to riff. Woos, though, in character, fires off a few quips, and it's kind of questionable. Is he talking in character, out loud, or is he just saying his quips to be funny? Because again, he's never played an RPG before, so he's not used to when you're talking in character, when you're talking out of character. And I'm not sure who suggested it. I'm not sure if it was Stark or Eric or maybe even me, but someone just said, did he say that out loud? And it caused someone to say, well, you should roll to check. And I said, let's do it. And it started off as a one-off joke, and we kept doing it. So you will hear, especially in the first half of season 1, you'll hear W73's character maybe say something, and then we go, okay, did you say that out loud? Let's roll and find out. And the dice decide, did he say that out loud, or did he keep it as a quiet thought? And I just want to note, this was not the plan for his character. It's one of the great things that you discover when you're playing a game. These little accidents happen like that. So, good news. If you made it this far, you're probably going, Nick, is this a season? Is it a campaign, a one-off? Well, I don't want to ruin it. You'll find out. But let's end this first intro episode talking about our first season and some of the characters that you're going to meet. Being it is Star Wars, it is important to note that our tale takes place between The Empire Strikes Back and The Return of the Jedi, and follows a ragtag team of individuals that may or may not be part of the Rebel Alliance. So, if you have a moment and want to feel atmospheric, we do have a link to a Star Wars opening crawl. So if you feel me reading it here is a bit, well, underwhelming, and understandably so, head on over to opposingrollspod.com and check out the video. That's OPPOSINGROLLSPOD.com. Or you can get a link to the video in our show notes. All right, our preamble into episode 1. The screen is dark, and in the darkness, it reads, "Long, long ago, in a galaxy far, far away." As it fades away, a loud orchestral chimes in, and that familiar music begins to swell as space stretches on forever, with a big old wall of text that moves upwards to infinity. The text reads, Opposing Roles Season 1, The Spurious Axiom. The open war between the Galactic Empire and the Rebellion continues, as the Rebel Alliance suffers a major defeat on the ice planet Hoth. With Rebel leaders Luke Skywalker, Leia Organa, and Han Solo now missing, Rebel Command fears the worst. Meanwhile, the Empire continues to spread misinformation about the destruction of Alderaan. In Leia's stead, Mon Mothma has taken a more active role in leading the Rebel Alliance, with multiple cells of the Rebellion fighting Imperial forces. One Rebel cell, featuring hotshot pilot Denton Stigor, Rebel Scout Sinya, and droid W-73, along with the crew of the Pleiades, have been asked to retake a small base on the Empire-controlled planet of Naboo, feeling it will help turn the tide of the war. Time, though, may be running out, as there are whispers in the darkest corner of the galaxy that the Empire's most heinous weapon could soon make itself known. The music fades as we pan through space, as a spaceship, a Corellian class, with an X-Wing attached to it, flies through the inky darkness of space. Inside is the crew. They consist of Denton Stigor, a hotshot X-Wing pilot, played by Eric Sternberger. Now, Denton works with a crew of former pirates turned rebel fighters. The ship is the Pleiades. They consist of Mika Anen, polite, jovial, laid back, now an outlaw on the run. He's a good dude, friendly and pleasant to be around. First to forgive, not forget, and he can never forgive the Empire. He lately, these past few years since joining the Rebels, have been toying with droids and other doohickeys. He's married to Captain Sela Anen. Sela Anen is the captain of the Pleiades and wife to Mika. She's cynical, bitter, and also loves to drink. Kahlurk, a Thorian pilot of the transport ship the Pleiades, he's best at flying, so flying is what he does. There's also 41B, the surgical droid, a surgical droid who is a bit tired of being put into the closet literally and figuratively. Mika, though, seems to be the only one, maybe outside of W-73, who likes 41B, and the feeling is honestly mutual. Now, the droid that belongs to Denton Stigor is a modified CL-UST-3 droid known as Cluster, the Asmatech droid. Cluster was programmed to be, super obedient, but since Denton has joined the Pleiades, Denton's noticed that Cluster has been a bit more mouthy. Mika swears that he hasn't modified the droid. Rounding out the crew is a C-3PO model, or actually a protocol droid model, that looks exactly like C-3PO in a few different ways, named W-73, played by Stephen Woosley, aka Woos. W-73 is mouthy, opinionated, and is spoiled or doted on by his master, Mika Anen, who treats the robot like a spoiled child than actual property. And finally, the newest crew member is a Twi'lek rebel scout named Sinya, played by Samantha Stark. Sinya met the crew of the Pleiades in a very unique and strange way, and is kind of quiet and to herself. So that's where we start in our first episode. Now, also interesting to note, I believe it's in the Game Master's Guide for Star Wars as well, but the rule was always make sure the players are having fun. And without spoiling too much, I think the players are having fun. I hope you will too. If you feel the need to rule lawyer me or have other suggestions or other things that, to let me know of or things that you were interested in, email me at goodbadgeeky@gmail.com. Now, enjoy Opposing Roles. Opposing Roles is presented by D4K Studios and is produced in conjunction with Nick Arganbright and William Dell, with all editing provided by Will Dell Productions. Our game system for this episode is Star Wars, the role-playing game, published by West End Games, republished by Fantasy Flight Games. Our cast is myself, Nick Arganbright, as Game Master, with Denton Stigor, played by Eric Sternberger, Twi'lek Rebel Scout Sinya, played by Samantha Stark, and Protocol Droid W73, being played by Stephen Woosley, aka Woos. Beta audience support provided by Laura Spires. Music for the show provided by Lucas King Piano and Pink Zebra featuring Benji Jackson. Website help provided by Alice Fox of alicefox.net. The logo and cover artwork provided by Scott Weaving for our podcast Opposing Roles, found at opposingrollspod.com. That's OPPOSINGROLLS pod.com. We are, of course, on Twitter and Instagram under the username GoodBadGeeky. Follow that for updates on all the different projects I'm involved in, including Opposing Roles. But warning, it is my personal Instagram and Twitter, so there's some of that too. Star Wars and all related titles, logos, and characters are trademarked property of Disney. And Opposing Roles does not imply an official affiliation with, endorsement of, or sponsorship by the copyright and trademark holders, unless otherwise noted. Opposing Roles is a production of D4K Studios.